So here we'll be talking about the quest for the historical Jesus. We have been looking at theological assertions and statements of faith about Jesus. For instance, that Jesus is both human and divine, or that he is the Son of God, statements like that. But even statements of faith are not arbitrary. Statements of faith are grounded or anchored in what one believes to be true. For instance, you can't truly believe that Jesus is the Son of God if his actual existence is in doubt for you. Faith statements about Jesus can be assessed by reference to the figure they claim to interpret. That's Jesus. Our faith claims about Jesus should be tethered to historical facts. These facts and the faith claims should be coherent. For instance, there's a reasonable resonance between the claim that Jesus is human and divine and the historical fact that Jesus was known to be a miracle worker even by those who did not accept his claims. The historical facts are not meant to justify the faith claims, they simply clear the path for belief. Now, our historical knowledge of Jesus is mediated chiefly by documents, which are the New Testament writings, written to promote theological understanding, not works of history in the modern sense. For instance, the word gospel, which comes from the Greek word evangelion, means good news. So gospels are a proclamation of good news and not a news documentary. This means that an author identifies the content as good news and anticipates that the audience will receive it as such. This sort of literature is thus composed differently than a modern day historical study. So it's important to keep this in mind here about the different genres of literature we encounter when we deal with matters of faith. Okay? So we cannot treat the Gospels as a newspaper or a modern day magazine, but treat them as simply proclamations or preaching. So if you imagine yourself going into a church or temple or into a religious service on, let's say Sunday, and you hear a preacher preaching what they consider to be good news, you accept what they say as truthful, but you understand that rhetorically it works in a particular way, right? He or she is working with particular facts and molding them with certain ideas to have an impact on you. So this doesn't make it any less truthful. It just means that if you want to get any kind of information from that, you have to understand what sort of genre it is and how the information is being used. Now, the historical study of Jesus' life does not exhaust the task of interpreting the Gospels. So historical study is something of a floor and not a ceiling. Demonstrable historical facts coupled with a responsible philosophy of existence are a good starting point for theology, but they are not its end point. This means that historical study is very useful, but the scope of faith and thus theology are not limited by demonstrable history. Okay, so you can imagine here if someone said that you can only or you should only believe what you can prove scientifically, then you realize that your life will become impossible because that's just not how human beings operate. Now, there's some things in our life that we want to get scientific certainty about, but in general, we understand that truthfulness goes beyond what is simply demonstrable. Okay, so also in theology and in matters of faith, the fact that not everything can be demonstrated scientifically or historically doesn't undermine the claim itself, the faith claim. Okay. However, there has to be a relationship between faith claims and historical facts. There has to be something, the faith claims have to be tethered to historical facts, but historical facts don't justify the faith claims. Now, when it comes to the gospel, our chief sources of information about Jesus' public life are the four gospels. For much of the church's history, the gospels were taken in a straightforward manner as reliable sources of information about Jesus' actual words and deeds. But in the 18th century, there was the emergence of what's called biblical criticism, and this led to a gradual recognition that the Gospels are primarily expressions of Christian preaching. Now, biblical criticism is an approach to studying the Bible that is critical. And when we say critical, we don't mean critical in a negative sense, as in when you think of someone criticizing you. We mean critical in an academic sense, where you do a very, very close reading of texts and you examine the context of any text, its culture, the language, and you get very technical about trying to understand the text that you're dealing with. And that's a process of biblical criticism, and that is what emerged sometime in the 17th, 18th century. We can retrieve historical data about Jesus, but the task requires careful methodical investigation, and it entails a willingness to settle for fragmentary results. So we're only going to get so much if you insist on getting demonstrable historical data. Yet some historical knowledge of Jesus seems essential for Christology, and we will look at the chief stages of modern inquiry into the question of how much we can know historically about Jesus Christ.